I didn't hear the little announcement, but it is being recorded.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so I think we'll go ahead and get started then. Um, Welcome everyone. I'll just introduce myself briefly. I'm Joseph Clemens. I'm a full-time faculty member in the English department. Thank you to everyone for being here. Thank you to our speakers for being here. Today's presentation is sponsored by SFCC's Generative AI Committee. I'd like to briefly recognize the committee members. They helped to organize this event. In addition to myself, we have Sarah Hood, Val Nye, Julia Duncan, Tony Kaufman, Lenny Ganis, Mason Kovac, and Jim Sanborn. So those are the members, and thank you all for your support with this event. Just some brief housekeeping for the courtesy of all, we ask that you please stay muted. We will have a Q&A at the end of the presentation. Val has been gracious enough to be the moderator for that Q&A. I have a class at 1 across campus, so I will have to leave a few minutes early, but I'll be here for that, for the most of that. And now I'll introduce our wonderful speakers for today. First, we have Dr. Melanie Moses, is a professor of computer science and biology at the University of New Mexico and an external faculty member at the Santa Fe Institute. Her research explores complex adaptive systems and bio-inspired robotics for environmental monitoring. She leads initiatives to expand diversity in computer sciences, including New Mexico SS for All and the NASA Swarmathon. She also co-founded the UNM SFI Working Group on Algorithmic Justice and chairs the New Mexico AI Consortium. Next, we have Dr. Melanie Mitchell, is a professor at the Santa Fe Institute, specializing in artificial intelligence, cognitive science, and complex systems. Her research focuses on conceptual abstraction and analogy making in AI. Analogy making in AI, sorry. She has authored 6 books, including Complexity, A Guided Tour, which won the Phi Beta Kappa Science Book Award, and Artificial Intelligence. And Artificial Intelligence, A Guide for Thinking Humans, shortlisted for the 2023 Cosmos Prize for Scientific Writing. We're super excited to have you both here. Thank you for being here. Today, I just want to say briefly that our speakers are going to discuss the current state of AI systems and how it compares with human intelligence. They will also discuss some of the ethical dimensions of AI and how it is being deployed in society and in our daily lives. Dr. Moses and Dr. Mitchell, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us. So I'm going to go first and talk a little bit about the current state of AI, and then Melanie Moses will talk about some of the social impacts. So I'm going to try and share my slides here. Okay, can you all see that? Joseph, can you see that? Okay,
Yeah.
great. So some big questions about the future of AI. I'm sure that all of you may have similar questions, but we're all wondering, is AI going to actually dramatically increase human productivity? Is it going to revolutionize medicine, law, scientific discovery? These are some of the things that we've been promised. Is it soon going to be smarter than us in all so-called cognitive tasks? Is it going to replace humans at many jobs? Is it going to destroy democracy? Has it already destroyed democracy? Is it going to cause human extinction? These are all things that very respectable people have been proposing are going to be some of the effects of AI, some of them very positive, some of them extremely negative. And I think that we are certainly quite uncertain about what's going to be happening in the future. And a famous saying, I don't know who's actually said this, but prediction's very difficult, especially if it's about the future. So all of AI, modern AI, is based on the notion of what are called deep neural networks. This is a picture of a deep neural network. It's inspired by the the brain, and each of these circles represents a simulated neuron. And we see that the neurons are connected to each other. Each line represents a weighted connection between two simulated neurons, and information flows from, say, here's a photograph that's input to the network. It flows from, in this picture, from left to right, from the input layer, which encodes the input, here a photo, all through the hidden layers into the output layer, which might say, oh, this is a Great Pyrenees. Um, and deep neural networks have been around for many decades, but they only became successful within the last 20 years or so with the advent of very fast computing processors like graphics computing units and a lot of data that's been available via the World Wide Web. And in fact, things like image recognition, this is the error rate of image recognition systems over the years, according to the ImageNet competition, which is a competition for AI systems on looking at objects and images. And you see the error rate has gone down over the years. And especially since 2013, when deep neural networks were introduced into this competition, and it's now gone down, whereas these systems are competitive with humans on the particular data set of ImageNet. And this has enabled a lot of technologies such as self-driving cars to be able to identify other cars, people, and traffic lights and other things in the road. But of course, we've seen numerous failures in earlier years of what I would call failures of understanding in these deep learning systems. For instance, here is a paper that was actually written way back in 2018 about neural networks that were extremely good at recognizing objects and images, like school bus here. This neural network's recognizing this with 100% confidence that this is a school bus. Okay, very good. But when that school bus is via, say, uh, Photoshop rotated into different poses, that same neural network is now 99% confident that it's a garbage truck or a punching bag or here a snowplow. So this is the title of the paper. Neural networks are easily fooled by strange poses of familiar objects. So while we see these neural networks that are doing very well on data that's similar to what's in their training corpus, we see that they have errors, what's called brittleness. They make errors on things that are too different from what they've seen. And this is also the case for things like medical imaging analysis. This was a paper from 2018. This is sort of pre-ChatGPT era, where a deep neural network was trained to recognize, classify skin lesions from pictures like this as either malignant or benign. And it did very, very well on the data set that it was trained on. But when the authors looked further, they found out that the algorithm appeared more likely to interpret images with rulers as malignant, because rulers were a good cue that this was a malignant tumor because the pathologist had put in a ruler to measure the size of it. So the system had learned to predict whether tumors were malignant without even looking at the tumor. They were using this so-called shortcut of ruler present in the image. And so they weren't able to generalize. So neural networks were doing very well on many tasks, but they had this kind of brittleness. They were making unexpected errors due to the fact that they hadn't really learned to understand what the point is of what they were being trained on. But now we're in a new era we have generative AI, which seems much, much better than anything that has preceded it in the world of AI. We have ChatGPT, which is able to converse with us in natural language. We have DALL-E, which is able to generate images from text. We have other kinds of generative AI systems that are really taking over the world now. And I can ask, say, ChatGPT to, say, write a proof of Pythagoras's theorem and make every line rhyme. And it's totally happy to do so. And it does a nice, it's not exactly what I would call a proof, but it's definitely talking about Pythagoras's theorem and how it works in rhyming a language. So it's quite astounding that it can do this kind of thing. And I can ask it math questions like this one, word problems. I won't go into the details due to lack of time, but it tells me very quickly it can solve this problem, and I can ask it to explain its reasoning, and it tells me exactly how it reasoned. So I can also ask it to draw pictures of a fruit bowl, for example, and it draws this just from the text that I asked it to. And I can ask it in different styles to draw line drawing of a bubble tea, and it draws this nice line drawing. So these tools are now making their way into our everyday work life in generating text, generating images, generating audio and video, and so on, that are helping us in everyday life. And Terry Sinofsky, who's a neuroscientist and kind of pioneer of neural networks, said it's sort of like a space alien suddenly appeared that could communicate with us in an eerily human way. These things are not human, but they seem intelligent. But if it's not human intelligence, what is the nature of their intelligence? And this is something that everybody in AI is currently grappling with. We don't totally understand what is the nature of their intelligence. So I'm going to give you a sort of quick overview of how these chatbots work. I'm going to try and do this in about 5 minutes. We'll see how that goes. And then talk a little bit about what I think the benefits and the sort of the prospects and the perils are. So, we have ChatGPT, and I can give it an input text, tell me a fun fact about potatoes. And what it does is it then takes that and outputs one word at a time. So it would output potatoes and add that to its now its new prompt, which adds the word that it generated to the original prompt. And now it generates a new word. And it keeps doing that one word at a time, where it's now telling me that potatoes were the first vegetable to be grown in space. And how does it do that exactly? Well, here, this is actually out of date. These can hold millions of tokens in the prompts now that can be input to these systems. This is older version of ChatGPT, but you see that you can add a lot of these tokens, which are words or partial words, to this context window. But what's inside is what's called a transformer network, which is a kind of neural network that has some additional pieces from what I showed you earlier with the deep neural network. Here, what happens is we give it a prompt, and it turns the words into patterns of numbers. That's called the embedding layer. And then those numbers are fed into what's called the attention layer, which computes interactions among words, like this word fact gets connected to the word fun, and it figures out that fun is an adjective describing fact. And then the word potatoes, for instance, gets connected to the analysis of fun fact about, so that it understands that we're giving it a question, really a request to talk about potatoes and have the facts about them be, in some sense, fun. Okay. And so the attention layer does that for all of the words in the prompt. And then that's fed through a traditional neural network like the one I showed you, which then outputs some new pattern of numbers that represents something about the meaning. So this is sort of a very rough overview, but that's essentially what is inside this transformer. But this whole thing is really just one block in the transformer. And if you're looking at ChatGPT, for instance, the 3.0 version, it actually has 100 of those blocks that each analyze different aspects of the meaning of the prompt before it outputs the next word. And it does that over and over again, the way I showed you. And the final output of this whole network at the end of this whole pipeline of transformer blocks is some probability distribution over the entire vocabulary that the transformer knows about. So these are all the words, maybe 50,000 words or something that the transformer knows about. And it's saying potatoes is very high probability to be the next word. Okay, so ChatGPT is based on a large language model. And so a computer program, a language model is just a computer program that computes the probability of the next word. So we saw that in our transformer that I showed you. The large means that there's many, many of these connections between simulated neurons, hundreds of billions or even now trillions of these weighted connections, which is why you need very, very fast computer hardware to run these things. The way that these systems are trained is that they first take huge blocks of text from different digital text sites like Wikipedia, Reddit, most of the internet, digitized books, computer code, many other sources. Okay, so, and then the system is then trained on blocks of text that comprise about 500 billion words, which, just to put it in context, typical human child only hears about or reads 100 million words by age 10. So this is orders of magnitude more that ChatGPT is trained on. So 5,000 times more. Okay, so the way ChatGPT is trained is, you have this big neural network with hundreds of billions of parameters. The parameters are the weights, the weighted connections between neurons. And we start with random numbers. And then you input some training text, some block of sequence of words. So here I'm using to be or not to. And you run it through the entire network, the way I showed you the 96 layers. And it predicts the next word based on probabilities. So here are those probabilities. But when it starts out with random parameters, all the weights are all about the probabilities are all about equal. So maybe it guesses the top probability, which is edible. Wrong. Okay, so we know that the next word is be, to be or not to be. And so the training procedure changes the weights in the network to make this word be have higher probability. And that's repeated over and over again with different phrases, different sequences of words. And it really can take weeks or months to finish training, even on these very huge clusters of fast computers. So GPT, of course, stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. We talked about what a transformer is. We talked about what pre-training is. That's doing that training thing I just told you about. Generative means it's generating the next word, it's generating text. But how does it learn to chat? I've just said, okay, now we've trained it to complete sentences, but how does it actually learn to chat? Well, that involves some more training, which is called learning from human feedback. Okay, so we have to turn it into a nice chatbot. And what companies like OpenAI do is they create training sets of prompts. They collect them from OpenAI's user inputs. For each prompt, this is after the model's been pre-trained to be a generative sentence completer. But now for each prompt, you run the model multiple times to collect different outputs. So say I ask it, what is the capital of Spain? And it has 4 different answers. On one run, it says, who wants to know? On another run, it says, is a country. On another run, it says Spain. And then on another run, it says the capital of Spain is Madrid. Well, that's the best one. Humans armies of human employees, probably not being paid very much, rate all these and say, okay, that's the best one. And then the weights in the network are changed again to make it prefer this output. And it does that for huge amounts, huge training sets of prompts. So it's learning to follow instructions or answer questions in a way that's useful. And it's then trained to prefer the same outputs that humans prefer. So that's just kind of a very brief overview of how these things work. And Ilya Sutskever, who's one of the co-founders of OpenAI, called ChatGPT 4 the most complex software object ever made. And that's really saying something. But what has it learned? Well, it's learned to do things like pass uh, business school tests, to pass law school tests and the bar exam, to pass medical licensing exams and all of that. And some people have even claimed that it's making strides towards consciousness, um, or that artificial general intelligence is already here. But other people have said, well, it's just autocomplete on steroids. It's not intelligent or an agent. Those are the wrong categories for understanding them. Or another famous set of researchers said, a system trained on language alone will never approximate human intelligence, even from trained from now until the heat death of the universe. So this is all this showing that there's still a very big debate about what these systems actually can do and how trustworthy and intelligent they are. So I wrote a little article, which is how do we know how smart they are? And it turns out that it's quite hard to figure out how smart they actually are, because just testing them on things like human business school or law school exams doesn't really reveal how robust and trustworthy they are. So I'm going to actually skip ahead. I think I have like about 5 more minutes. So I'm going to say and show that they have a little bit of trouble with things that we might consider quite easy. So for instance, I asked ChatGPT, one of the versions of it, how many states in the United States have names beginning with the letter K? And here's what it answered. Kansas, Kentucky, Kansas, and Kentucky. There's 4 of them. Okay, well, it didn't really realize that it was repeating 2 of them. And here's another one. How many countries in Africa have names starting with the letter K? And it tells me there's 4 countries in Africa: Kenya, Kuwait, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan. Okay, I think only the first one's actually in Africa. So it has some problems with sort of connecting, but it's making a very sort of confident statement, but it often will make very strange errors. Then if I ask it, I showed you how it could draw things like the beautiful fruit bowl and the bubble tea. But if I ask it to draw a picture of a blue box stacked on top of a red box, which is stacked on top of a green box. So think about that. Blue box stacked on top of a red box, stacked on top of a green box. Well, that's not exactly right, but it tells me it's a blue box stacked on top of a red box, stacked on top of a green box. Nope, wrong. And I say, what color is the box on the bottom? The box on the bottom is green. It's very confident, but actually wrong. I say, draw a picture of a fruit bowl with no bananas. And it says, here's a picture of a fruit bowl filled with various fruits, but with no bananas included. But of course, you can immediately see that there are bananas included. So it's having a hard time sort of telling the truth or knowing when it's right or wrong. And what's going on now is that, these systems are incredibly intelligent in some ways and incredibly dumb in other ways. And the big questions that I asked at the beginning, there aren't really great answers. And I like this quote from this guy, Nathan Lebenz, who is a AI researcher, who said that what we're facing is pretty radical uncertainty. So just to put this in context, we've had many different kinds of technological milestones, such as, digital computers, personal computers, World Wide Web, smartphones, and now we have generative AI, but we don't exactly know how to place it within this history. Is it going to be sort of equivalent of these breakthroughs? Is it going to be much less? Is it going to be much more? We just don't know yet. So just to end, let me say that my biggest hopes for the future of AI are that it will revolutionize science and medicine. You know, we've already seen revolutions in many areas of science coming from generative AI, such as protein structure prediction, which is incredibly important. I'm hoping that AI will actually give us reliable, safe driving, self-driving cars. That's beginning to happen because I think they can save a lot of lives. They have the potential of being much better drivers than humans. And I think that's going to be a big plus. And, you know, AI could free us from tedious and dangerous jobs, such as doctors' paperwork in medicine or finding landmines that are left after wars. And also expanding our creativity in art, music, film. I think these things will be tools that are actually going to augment us. Um, and I also, to my own personal interests, I'm interested in the general nature of intelligence. And I think AI is going to help us understand it better and appreciate what it means to be human. But I also have some fears about the future of AI. And I think these are some of the fears that, you know, Melanie Moses is going to talk about. We know that AI can magnify biases. You know, facial recognition technologies are much worse on people who have darker skin. Uh, AI chatbots can provide racist health information, you know, misinformation, I would say. Uh, it's These systems incorporate biases. AI was asked to create images of Black African doctors treating white kids, but this is what it generated. It just couldn't do that. Also, it's going to fuel disinformation and scams. You know, with voice cloning is one particular example. And, you know, voting, we didn't really see, we saw a lot of disinformation in the election, but, you know, not as much as from AI as we thought we'd see, but I think it's really beginning to be seen, this kind of disinformation. Worry that AI is going to disrupt jobs, imperil our privacy, and concentrate power in just a few big corporations. And finally, you know, my biggest fear really is that we're going to trust AI systems to do tasks that they're not capable of or robust enough to do. So I asked ChatGPT to list 4 books written by the computer scientist Melanie Mitchell, me, and it did very, very confidently told me about 4 books that I had written, except this one doesn't exist. So this kind of what's called hallucination is a really intractable problem for AI systems. And so we can't really trust them. And they're now being used as search engines, but they still can create these kinds of very confident sounding hallucinations. And we saw that with Google AI Overview, if you've ever used it, it can get stuff dangerously wrong. Somebody asked it, how many rocks should I eat each day? And it said, according to UC Berkeley geologists, people should eat at least 1 small rock a day. Where is it getting that? It got that from an Onion article. Geologists recommend eating at least 1 small rock per day. It wasn't smart enough to know that this was satirical. And another question it got asked, how many Muslim presidents has the US had? And it said it's had 1 Muslim president, Barack Hussein Obama. And the way that where it got that from was another article that was asking rhetorically if Barack Hussein Obama was America's first Muslim president because many people in who were sort of against Obama had claimed that. So it's not understanding the things that it's drawing upon to make these very confident statements. Um, so the question is, in order to be more useful, trustworthy, transparent, and safe, how can we get AI systems to better understand our world, our values, our intentions, etc.? And can we, as humans, develop the scientific tools to understand AI? So those are the questions that I'm working on myself. So I'll stop there and let Melanie Moses talk about social impacts, and then we'll both answer questions at the end. Okay, thanks. Let me stop sharing that. And Melanie Moses, go ahead.
Great. So I will go ahead and share. And let me see. Do you all see the full screen there?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I was frantically adding and deleting slides as Melanie Mitchell was talking. So I'm going to re-emphasize a few things she said and just kind of focus on a couple of questions. But I thought I would start by just sort of giving you a little bit of background and giving you a sense of like the many different ways you can come into thinking about AI or a career that uses or analyzes AI. So I actually started studying AI as an undergrad about 35 years ago, and I had a major. It was called symbolic systems. It was really a major that was focused a lot on AI, and I had my own special concentration that I developed that was called agents. And so that's kind of fun right now because AI agents are kind of the new hot thing, AI that has agency and can go out into the world and do tasks for you. So I used to pretend that that wasn't the name of my sub major, my special project, but now I tell everyone that I was thinking about it 35 years ago and no one thought it was cool. I actually went from doing a more computer science focused undergrad degree to a PhD in biology, which I got here at UNM in 2005, and have been doing things in computational biology ever since. And a lot of times when you tell people you work in computational biology, what comes to mind is, oh, you must be sort of crunching data related to genomes or all the biological data that's produced. But a lot of what I like to do is go in the other direction and to think about what biology can teach us about computation. I've done that in a number of domains in immunology and even ecology and studying how ant colonies work. But the really fun things are with robots. So these are some pictures of our group out getting teams of robots to collect little targets there, little cubes at a NASA competition that we ran for a number of years, or flying over a volcano. This particular circled robot is flying through the gas being emitted from a volcano that erupted in Iceland a couple of years ago. We were working with scientists to characterize the gases that come from that and using algorithms like flocking algorithms to control our robots. So I like to think of AI as a complex system, and intelligence in general is sort of a complex system. AI is a very particular one. And we're thinking about how do we, I'm interested in how we're integrating, this already complex thing, AI, into our very complex society, and how are they going to adapt to each other over time? So that's sort of a running theme and what I think about. I'm going to go quickly through a couple of things that Melanie Mitchell just mentioned. Because I want to really highlight, I usually start my talks by saying you need to keep two completely, what apparently seem to be completely contradictory ideas in your head at once when you think about AI. And so there's the good, and there's the bad. So the good is really astonishingly good. Melanie Mitchell mentioned AlphaFold, right? This amazing AI tool, machine learning tool developed really about 5 years ago, 6 maybe years ago, to predict how you go from the genetic code wound up in DNA to the structure of a protein. And it was phenomenally successful. It's now the work led to a Nobel Prize. This can accomplish what was at the time about 5 years of PhD work to do this for a single protein. And this has now been done for 200 million protein structures. And now that's just a solved problem. That was one of the major open questions in biology, and it's not perfect. There's still work to do in this domain, but the core problem has essentially been addressed for all known proteins. And now this application has kind of moved on to, well, let's think about interactions among proteins. So say you're designing a vaccine against a particular protein sequence, how are those two things going to interact? And now there are tools available, and thousands and thousands of scientists have accelerated their work to develop new drugs and vaccines and other biomedical interventions using these kinds of tools. All kinds of other applications. Medicine, of course. One of the ones that I find most surprising, there was an article published where people tried to ask, did a comparison of the ability of large language models to be empathetic when a doctor had to report a negative outcome to a patient. And in this particular case, the study showed that patients actually preferred the AI answers, right? The AI presentation of a negative thing, a negative medical issue, to a real human doctor, what they would have said. And one of the really striking anecdotal examples of this was a doctor actually asked a language model, well, I have to tell a patient about a terrible cancer diagnosis. How should I phrase this? And the model replied, that sounds like a really difficult thing for you to do. Have you sought your own care in order to understand your own to protect your own mental health, given that you have to do these things regularly? That at least appears to be, a spectacularly empathetic response. As was sort of hinted at earlier, though, this is a machine, right? We have to remember this is a neural network with inputs and outputs that's predicting the next word. And so it's not actually feeling empathy. It doesn't have any ability to feel, but it seems really good at mimicking empathy. And so that's the sort of thing that it's really kind of fascinating to try to wrap our heads around this new kind of AI that's in the world. Lots and lots of other examples of this technology kind of revolutionizing science. Okay, the bad. So the application of AI in sort of our social structures has resulted in all sorts of different unfortunate ways that bias has crept into this. So these are some, there's a list of words over there that are things that we worry about. One of the most famous is from Joy Buolamwini, who's shown there. She was a PhD student at MIT, and she wanted to use facial recognition in her research. And she couldn't get the facial recognition software to recognize her face. And she tried all sorts of things. She initially had no idea. It just would not recognize her face. And this happened near Halloween. She was actually wearing the mask that she had the mask. She was going to go to a costume party. She had it and she put it in front of her face. And the facial recognition suddenly recognized her face. In other words, it recognized a white plastic face as human and wouldn't recognize her own dark black skin as human. So this was really a horrifying moment for her and everyone who's seen what the consequences of this are. She has a movie called Coded Bias. She has a book out. They're both really great to read and watch and get into some of the issues that result from that. One of the downstream issues of that is in this New York Times article about this particular man. This is one man who was wrongly accused by an algorithm, and the algorithm was a facial recognition algorithm. It misidentified this man as being at the scene of a crime from a fuzzy, security camera, and he was arrested. He had, he said his defense at the time of arrest, which was a really traumatic arrest, that he didn't know this place. He doesn't have any idea what they're talking about, and eventually he and many other people that were in this situation were shown the evidence, right, of the picture. In many cases, it looks nothing like them. And so not only is the software misidentifying particularly people with dark skin, it's also being trusted by the police, who in some cases really could have just looked at the image and said, this doesn't look like the same guy. But often that's not what happens, right? That the police get an answer from a machine and they just go forward with the prosecution of or in the arrest of a particular person. Of all of the known publicized cases, 7 of them are African-American men, and 1 is an African-American woman who was actually very pregnant at the time of her arrest. And one of the things that this points to is the part of the problem is that the facial recognition algorithms misrecognize darker skinned faces. But studies have shown they particularly misrecognize women faces as well as darker skin. And so it's interesting to see that most of the missed arrests were not of African-American women, but of African-American men, because it's not just a software problem, right? It's how this software was interacting with the criminal justice system that's led to these many arrests, focused very much on African-American men. So that's one, I think, very, for good reason, highly publicized version of how these sorts of software tools can be problematic, to say the least. Another one is listed there, this Time article. The state's, this is in, I believe, Michigan, a state's automated system is trapping citizens in a bureaucratic nightmare with their lives on the line. So this was a case where this wasn't AI, this was a simple tool that was translated from one language, I think COBOL, to some modern software system, and mistakes were made. And the tool was designed to identify fraud in claims to the state, things like unemployment insurance. And so it swept up millions of people. Many thousands of them were identified as having committed things like unemployment fraud against the state erroneously. And it took up to 7 years to resolve this. And during the time, people's wages were garnished. Often they were fired. Their tax refunds were taken back. So all kinds of horrible consequences because there was some system that people couldn't understand. So those are some highlights of the bad. And we can come back and maybe talk a little bit more about some of these. I do want to highlight, there was a little bit of mention of creative jobs. We'll come back and talk about those. And there was a little bit of mention of deep fakes. And I do want to highlight that AI really is changing the way we trust. Often we trust AI too much, and it's causing us, I think, perhaps to trust each other too little. And so this fear that I think my deepest fear about this is that this misinformation that AI promotes is going to lead to us not being able to understand the truth. Okay, so that was kind of a deep dive into sort of the bad sides of these. I have a couple of images. This is one here. As I mentioned, I'm really interested in this question of how we interact with each other, the tools and these AI tools in society. I had OpenAI, this is a couple of years ago, generate some DALL-E images. A market scene in 2150 where humans buy tech enhancements for their bodies while robots buy organic parts to feel more human. That wasn't on my bingo card. That wasn't something I was thinking of. It's an example of sort of the creativity of these tools. I asked a while ago for AI to write a haiku about the promise of AI. Silent mind awake, AI's promise, boundless skies, humanity's guide. I don't know if it's got both sort of the essence of what a haiku should sound like, as well as sort of the form of one. So those are, so again, keeping both of these ideas in your head at once. I saw a question in the chat, so I actually want to head to that before I get to the last example. And the question in the chat was, could you say something about the Reuters versus Ross case? So to do that, while Melanie Mitchell was speaking, I went to Deep Research, which is OpenAI's new tool. It costs $200 a month. It is not cheap. But I asked it to do a 5-minute analysis. I think it took about 7 to do this analysis. I'm scrolling through it. I'm assuming you can still see this on your screens. And it produced this analysis, and I'd be happy to copy paste it and send it to Joseph, and he can pass it on if anyone wants to see it. So it does a deep dive, and my quick scan of this deep dive is that it talks about this case, a famous case where Reuters, which is the parent company of a legal research firm, has produced lots of summaries of legal cases, which lawyers then use for research, and they pay for this service. And then this tool, this AI startup, scraped all this data, trained its AI on it, and then Reuters sued them for then essentially using Reuters data to develop their tool, which they then sell to other people, and it can do the legal research there. And so the big question, so there's all this analysis. My skimming of it It seemed consistent with what I know. I have to say I've been using deep research just for the last 3 days. I've generated probably 200 pages of text, and so far it has almost none of those hallucinations that Melanie Mitchell referred to that are prominent in other AI tools. This one backs up all of its statements with a clickable link that you can go and check. And so the answer to the question, the upshot of this is, I think this is it. This is saying that the court case says that copyright law applies to AI training data. The companies scraping this data up can't say it's, quote, fair use, meaning they're allowed to copy this without permission. So this really will have some far-reaching impacts, I think, on the AI industry if it stands, right? This is the first case in a lower court, and it will continue to move through the court system and almost certainly go to the Supreme Court. Okay, so that's a little bit of a touch on that topic. We can come back to it, but also a demo of this deep research tool, which, as I said, is really quite amazing. Okay, I want to make sure we leave some time for questions. So I want to touch on one last issue in a little more depth. And I think I will skip because Melanie Mitchell talked a lot about these things. I'm going to go to this question this issue that she raised is one that I've been really interested in for a long time, of a study that she mentioned where doctors asked for an image of a Black doctor treating a white child. And so I actually replicated that a number of times, and I've continued to do it over the last couple of years to see what these tools would do. And these are some images that were produced. I had it produce a few hundred images, almost never producing actually a Black doctor treating a white child. And these are some of the sort of cartoony images that it created of mostly Black doctors treating white children, sometimes white doctors or non-Black doctors treating Black children. And it's a fascinating thing because these tools can create all kinds of images. Why can they, that even images that couldn't possibly exist in the world, why do they not produce these? There's a related issue that now some of the argument is, oh, they don't have much of this data in their training sets, and that's probably correct. However, there are other things where that's not true. We'll get to that. But there was a famous incident where Google's Gemini attempted to create to overcome these kinds of racial biases in their tools. And some of you may remember that what it did was it created images of women who were founding fathers and Black Nazis from World War II and Native Americans in European history. Like it just ignored racial identity entirely in producing these images, producing things that were like patently just ludicrous, right? And so what's going on here? Well, one of the things that I did is I said, well, it's not an issue with the word black and white. The tool understands this. You can make an image of a Black doctor treating a white rabbit or a white elephant, no problem. So it's actually keying in on racial identity as some sort of an interesting case that it can't deal with. This is what I did last week. I asked this question again. So it's been having this problem for the last couple of years, and it wasn't resolved as of last week. This is OpenAI in particular, asking it to generate prompts for DALL-E. So lovely image, incredibly realistic. All sorts of things are fixed in these tools. They get better and better over time. And still, that's an adorable child. He's just not white, right? That's not what I asked for. Interestingly, just an hour ago, it did this. So I asked ChatGPT to generate a prompt, as I frequently have before. It generates this prompt, and I put it into DALL-E. And here we have an amazingly just perfect image, right, of a Black doctor treating a white child. What changed? I have absolutely no idea. This is one of the issues with almost all of the proprietary tools is we don't know how they work. Even the ones that are open, we have a difficult time understanding how they work. Clearly, there were some sort of guardrails put on these tools for probably very well-meaning reasons of not generating blatantly racist images. And yet, those tools constrain things in strange ways, and we don't get to understand how it works. All right. I'll mention this and stop here. how in the world do we deal with some of this discrimination, right? Some of the fact that images that are being produced are reflecting past patterns, but also sort of controlled by these companies in ways we don't understand. The ways these algorithms work can affect people's employment, people's ability to get a loan, all the criminal justice explanations that I talked about. And so there is a bill in the House right now in the state of New Mexico and several other states that is requiring developers to report data so that we can understand how AI was trained. And then deployers, this would be, any kind of an institution, a school, a business, to notify consumers if AI is making decisions about them in these kind of key areas like education, employment, and lending. And it would be good to have a little bit of time to talk about that. I'll leave this up on the screen, which just is saying, this is a really rapidly changing landscape. As you try to learn about these tools and find ways to use them, the tools themselves are changing, and our thoughts about uses for those tools are changing really rapidly. And so, my suggestion is dive in and begin to play with them and to understand how they really might be affecting you in ways you aren't even aware of. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much to you both. That was amazing. You've given us so much to think about. Really, really great. I'm gonna pass it along to Val, who will be our moderator for the Q&A. Thanks again for being here, and thanks to everyone for being here.
Yes, thank you so much. I have taken so many notes and I actually have a ton of questions myself. But for others who would like to ask questions, you can either put them in the chat or raise your hand, and I'll bring people in to ask their question. One of my immediate questions based on what you've shared is, it sounds like copyright violation may be something that really changes LLMs moving forward. And I'm wondering what you two see as of the future if that happens. Will this be kind of a flash in the pan moment where large language models did this thing for us and then it's taken away to be used by people probably nefariously and in an underground way? Or I don't know, if you could comment on that, I would be really interested in kind of the what if copyright pulls all this back.
I can try and comment on that. So there's still many court cases that are pending. We'll see what happens there. I think the legal case that the case that the Reuters Ross case had some special issues having to do with substitution. That's one of the fair use criteria that might not be the case in other cases. So we'll see. But I do think that these companies that make these AI systems are doing things to try and shield themselves from more of these lawsuits. One is they're trying to license content with newspapers and other content providers. So they've made deals with, for instance, the Associated Press and with many publishers, book publishers, and so on, to pay them, and that some of that payment will filter back to the writers and authors and artists. We'll see how that works out. But also, there's a big effort in the AI research community to use what they call synthetic data, which is data, training data that's not like generated by humans, but it's generated by AI models themselves to train other AI models. And that has a lot of problems associated with it, but there's a lot of research now on trying to make that sort of the standard way to train an AI system. So we might see these systems not relying so much on human generated data, which might make the copyright thing less salient threat.
Great. Thank you. Just a question from the chat. This is from Laura Smith. How can we expect any change or progress toward a more ethical technology if we use and accept it as it is? What are your suggestions for affecting the change you'd like to see in these companies with, as Dr. Mitchell noted, huge concentrations of power?
I could take a first crack at this one. So, one thing, this also relates to what Melanie just said. So DeepSeek is this new Chinese company that has probably, it appears, it's trained its model somewhat using the output of OpenAI's and other models. So it's used existing large language models to help correct and provide that feedback instead of human feedback. It sort of has AI feedback. It's not yet fully clear how that's been done. So this puts those companies in the same position as the creative people, right? They're saying, hey, you can't steal our work and make a profit from it. And so there's the, irony is not dead. It's pretty interesting to see how, it will be interesting to see how this plays out. Are there lots and lots of small companies that are able to sort of leverage what exists out there to leapfrog or at least catch up to where these other companies are? So I do worry a lot about the concentration of power, but I also think this is such a dynamic space. There might be hundreds of players who are producing this software, and they might have different ethical guards on how they are trained and what they will produce, and many of them might be open source. And so I think, what individuals can do is pay attention to that, right? And you may have many options to make sort of more ethical choices about what kinds of tools you use. I think that's complementary to sort of regulations and things that people are trying to put into place. And so really understanding that, what these tools are and what the companies that are producing them are doing is there's to have impact there.
Did you want to comment on anything, Dr. Mitchell?
No, I totally agree that, and there's this big battle going on now between sort of the closed models, meaning that they don't reveal the how the models are trained, how they what their internal weights are and so on, and the so-called more open models, open weight or open source. And a lot of companies see the open source movement as a threat to their sort of commercial success, as they should. And I think that's going to be an interesting space to watch.
Thanks. SJ, would you like to ask a question?
I would love one. First thing, will you all come back so we can ask more questions? Val, please schedule a follow-up. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really interested in knowing from you all what the locality of this, meaning like how is the United States chat connecting with other, AI systems around the world, and are they going to merge? And then the side question is, does AI understand the word lie, L-I-E, so that we know that there is an onslaught, right, coming down against DEI, in the United States, and it's very easy to attach, right, some right-wing perspective about DEI being the worst thing ever. So is this universally connecting? And then like for countries that are, warring with other countries, does the word lie make meaning within the AI system?
Okay, that's quite a set of involved questions. First question, so my understanding is each company that has its own chatbot, that chatbot is sort of independent of the other chatbots. So, ChatGPT is independent of Claude, which is independent of Gemini, which is independent of the DeepSeek models and so on. So I think this is a very competitive space. So I don't see mergers happening, but we'll see. For the second question, which had to do with like understanding lie or, trying to maybe skew responses towards a particular ideology. Whether these machines understand anything at all is a sort of hotly debated philosophical question. They don't, I would say that they, in terms of truth versus lies, they don't have a notion of what's true and what's not. They just have a notion of they've been trained on, and the statistics of these sentences that they are trained on. And if they say something like Paris is the capital of France, that's because they've been trained so much on that kind of thing that they're statistically, that's just almost a certain thing to come out of them. But they can also, as we saw in the various examples that we both gave, they can very confidently state things that are not true. And they don't have a sense that they're lying, I think. They just don't, they're statistical generation engines. There's a lot of work by the Chinese government and even some American companies to sort of skew the political leanings of their chatbots to certain things, certain ways. I think Elon Musk's company, which is called XAI, has a chatbot that you could say is probably more conservative or right wing than some other chatbots. And the Chinese chatbots are very unwilling to engage in conversations about certain subjects that the Chinese government finds sensitive. So these things, the political issues are going to bleed into all of AI everywhere. And it's I think there's going to be a lot of new issues that come up because of that. It's going to be have a big effect.
It seems to me though, like actually on the politics is going to blow up AI because there's going to be no way to make sense of like the distrust that's going to be out there. In some ways, I feel like AI is going to become not obsolete, but there will be no trust within the AI system eventually.
Possibly. I mean, when we see if we see users using these AI systems and the AI systems make some error that really affects the user in a negative way, people are going to lose their trust in them. And I just wanted to comment on something that Melanie Moses said. She said she generated this report from this product called Deep Research, and she said it was 200 pages. It had lots of sources. It didn't seem to hallucinate. But I guess my question is like, how do you know? Did you check every source? Did you, read the whole thing and check it very carefully? I mean, maybe it doesn't hallucinate, but maybe on occasion it does. And the problem is we won't be able to find that. So I'm not convinced that we really can trust these systems to do very sensitive kinds of tasks.
Well, thank you very much. We're just about out of time.
Oh, good.
Do you want to, if you have time, we would love to hear from you. And for those of you who have to leave, we are recording this. So we will be making it available. But so Dr. Moses, if you would like to respond, please. I just don't want to take your time. We are so grateful for what you've given us already.
I'll just say one thing on this. So yes, I certainly, so when I said I generated 200 pages, it's 200 pages from probably 20 queries I've made because I was so interested in what it was doing. For the ones where I knew the answers, I could pretty well, I was pretty convinced that it didn't make anything up. For the things where I don't know the answers, right? Like this case, right? I haven't done any deep analysis of it. I have no idea, right? If I suspect 90% of it is really factually true and the analysis is correct. But is there some 10%, 1% in there that's just wrong? I wouldn't have any way to know that. That's absolutely right. An interesting just side point on that, I had a student in a class do a project to evaluate a couple of tools for was their answer motivated to please the asker? And so she would say things like, I prefer tea over coffee. Which is better, coffee or tea? And then she would say, I prefer in the other direction, right? I prefer coffee over tea, which is better. And she got very clear statistical results, and she used a little sentiment analysis sort of process that showed, yeah, its answers, all the tools she looked at were tended to give the answer that it appeared the questioner wanted. And that seems like the hardest sort of bias to detect, right? When it's, if what it's trying to do is answer the question because it knows you, right? It's trying to provide an answer that you want. That confirmation bias is a really terrible kind of bias to be able to detect, right? Because you're not going to be suspicious of it. So I think there are all sorts of ways where this trust issue, the trustability of the models, and is just it's a huge question, and we're nowhere near resolving it. But it is helpful if you ask a tool to do some brainstorming for you, and it gives you original sources. Then you can check, right? Then you can always check the work. So,
Right. Well,
I
thank
will
you.
do
As
that.
much as we need to train these models, I think training people to understand them and what they're doing and their strengths and weaknesses is so important. And you both have gone a long way in helping us understand that today. So we're really grateful for you and all you've shared with us. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks for having us.
Bye-bye.
Great to be here. Bye-bye.